I have here today with me Diane Majors. Diane is the founder and CEO of Experience Catalysts, and she is also the Emeritus Chair and past CEO of the CXPA. Welcome, Diane.
Hi, it's great to be here today.
Would you like to start by telling us a little bit about your background, maybe, and we'll go to questions after that.
Oh, absolutely. It's a little quick, crazy background. I actually started my career as a clinical psychologist, so I've always been in human behavior. And when I took a break from that, I got hired by a CEO for a company in the States here that he just believed everything we needed to do was around customers. And this is years ago. And so that's how I got started. Was all back then, customer experience really didn't exist, but I went on to go to the corporate offices of that company and do the same thing there, and then have worked in and with many organizations, large and small. I grew up with CX, I say, as it was developing.
That's a good way to grow up. How did CX and ROI specifically become a focus for you? Can you maybe share some of the experiences that you had?
Because I had to. You can imagine somebody who's a psychologist. I didn't have a lot of financial background. Business was not, I took a couple of business courses. But what I discovered in the organization, when my first, major job, I would say, running customer experience and standing it up in an organization, was a logistics and supply chain company. And so if I couldn't tell the story like everybody else about how I was bringing money to the bottom line to something that seemed pretty fuzzy for a lot of people, then I wasn't going to be around very long. So luckily that company had tuition reimbursement. So I went back and got my MBA and decided, you know what, I'm going to get serious about this. So I started building those business cases early on in my career. And I think that's really served me well, because having that conversation with executives and being able to talk their language is really important.
That's certainly true. That's one of the best advice you've ever given to me, was to make friends with the CFOs, because they really are sitting on the money and they understand how to use it.
That is one of my t-shirts. That's right.
Yeah. What should we be thinking about when trying to prove return on experiences? Are we thinking about it in the correct way? What's your take on this?
I think we get over-rotated on the scores. The scores are good indicators, but what you really should be thinking about is like Disney. They have a satisfaction score, but even in the satisfaction score, they don't report the score. They report percentages by where how they're satisfied. Like on a scale of 1 to 5, what percentage are here, here, and here. And they focus on that and the drivers of dissatisfaction. So while you have a number, it's how you really look at it. But what they actually focus on, and what I suggest you focus on, is that true loyalty. And loyalty is retention, it's advocacy. Well, while that sounds still pretty fuzzy, it actually can be identified as the ability for you to see how many times customers are coming back, number of products that they own in their portfolio that are yours, how their customer lifetime value, some of those things that indicate loyalty, identifying what those are. So that's what I really think about when I think about how many times I see practitioners, so focused on the score and moving the score, when they can do that all day long, and the score might go up, but you might be losing customers all along the way. And that's revenue and cost to acquire new customers. So the more you can start translating what you're saying into financial measures, the better off you'll be in your career.
I suppose that's how you get management to buy into the CX programs as well, is by talking
It's
in
one
financial.
of the biggest ways. It's one of the biggest ways. That's what they talk about. What are they doing? So if you think about an executive meeting, they typically talk about the culture, strategy, what's happening, in the outside world. when it comes to customers, they're typically thinking about sales and acquisition. And so our role is to ensure that they know not only what drives that, but more importantly, what happens once the customer is on board. Are we engaging them? Are we retaining them? Right, that retention number they're focused on. And I don't think they really stop to think about how everything that they're doing really impacts what the customer is experiencing, right? So they say, oh, we're going to put more salespeople on the street. Well, good, bad, or indifferent, if they're bad salespeople, that can be an issue. So are you really thinking about what you're trying to accomplish, or are you just moving numbers? So I always encourage people to, influence those conversations with executives so they start talking a different language too, not just us talking a different language to them, but how they're talking about customers as an asset.
Right. We did some study a few years back with the chairmen of boards and executive teams and people sitting on management teams and boards. And the crazy results that we got from that study was that 9 out of 10 respondents say that they're not thinking about customers at all when they're making strategic decisions. How does that sound to you?
Okay, customers are the reason they exist, and they don't think about that one thing. Okay, that would be like me sailing a boat and not understanding what water was.
Exactly.
Just and the weather, that's a great analogy to kind of think about. You can put a boat on the water, but unless you know where you're headed and what the weather's going to be like, doesn't make much sense.
So you really need to. Yeah, so you really need to pull on the right strings. I think you had a good idea in your presentation about that, how to really specifically focus on what the management teams and boards are interested in.
Yeah, and each individual person too, I think, because they're all interested in something different. They're all incented and motivated to do things differently. I think a lot of times when I've been in an organization long enough, I challenge, well, I wouldn't say even long enough. I do it really upfront. I really challenge what their measures or metrics are, because if I look at them and say, all of these measures and metrics are about how we're doing, it has no impact. Everything you do here doesn't tell me anything about how we're impacting the customer, which, by the way, drives the numbers that you have. So number of campaign upticks, like how many campaigns were opened as a result of marketing. It's really the question I would turn that around is what are the topics of interest, and why are customers opening them? Like it's not the number that were opened, it's what did they get out of it, and then what did they do afterwards. So I always try to kind of ask that next question about the why, and then what is the customer doing differently because of it. I think those are really one great way to kind of take a basic statement and build on it if you're talking to an executive.
And also making them see that the customers are really their sales figures. They're basically behind those figures in so many ways.
They forget. They forget. Yeah. We have to remind them who writes their paycheck.
Mm-hmm. What about the operative side? How do you get these guys on board really to see the importance of customers and customer experiences?
Operations specifically, or like product development?
Well, I'd say anything from customer support to product development, maybe. Anything that has to do.
So you're talking
everybody, to me at least, has some kind of role in that they play in the whole of the customer experience.
Everyone does. Yeah, everyone does. I remember at that same logistics company, we actually took some of the warehouse, so that it's a order and fulfill and delivery service. And one of the things that we did is we took the warehouse managers and we brought them along on some of our interviews with customers. And the thing that they didn't really understand was when they have a mispick, meaning they get the wrong product, or they were out of something and they substituted it, or they were out and they just outed it and said, we can't deliver it. They didn't really understand the impact to the customer's business and how important that was when the customer was judging the difference between us and their other people who were also delivering to the location, as they had several suppliers. And it became one of the key indicators of whether they were going to stay with us or buy more from us, was our order accuracy. And so one of those things, and this was long before technology was even there, but even with technology, if we're not managing our inventory correctly, it can have a true impact and we can lose that business. And then we equated that to if we lose one customer, it's worth X dollars. And we've all seen the ups and downs of business. If we don't have the business, we have to lay off people. Then it became personal for them, and understanding that just this package we were sending them, the importance of that to the company's business. This was the restaurant business, right? So if you're out of the one steak that they have, and that's a signature dish for them, not a good thing. So they go to another distributor, and they're able to get it for them. Well, where are they going to most likely buy?
Next time.
We began to look at for each of the other positions, not just the executives, but what does the product manager care about, and what does product marketing care about, and what does care really, how they contribute to the organization.
How do you engage the care teams and other people on the operative side into these conversations about CX and ROI?
I want to talk a little bit about the care team specifically. So I think what we are probably missing in many organizations is we tend to think of care as kind of the catch-all for things that customers are struggling with. The key message behind that is customers are struggling with something. They either don't understand the content on your website, they can't find something, the description isn't clear, they're not able to do things digitally that they want to. They're calling care for a reason. So I always talk to the care team about how they can be integrated into the organization in a way that they are learning so much about where the broken experiences are. How can we make sure they bring those to the rest of the organization to fix those problems that are causing the call in the first place? Even if it's a value add, most care teams, if we've seen over time as technology is taking care of some of the basic issues, that they're getting these higher, more complex issues. So it's helping us to really reflect back to the organization where we are creating broken experiences, or we're not meeting the needs when a customer has a need that they want fulfilled. So that's an important part for care. And I think we don't take advantage of all of the knowledge and information that they have available about where experiences are not going well.
That's for sure. How much have you been involved in gathering and integrating X and O data, so experience data, with the operative side's data to make the ROI?
I always like to say the O data is really what's happening. So I think about netnography, which is a new term for folks. We talk about ethnography, watching the customer, right? But netnography is watching what they're doing online or on their app. So netnography, as we were talking about, is all about watching the behavior of customers interacting with apps and websites. And what we find is that's what they're doing, right? Even if you serve somebody, you go to a mall and you're watching people shop, right? That's what they're doing. And what I think the X data, the experience data, tells us is the why. And so if we're able to put together in the information in ROI, if we're able to say, hey, we're seeing acquisition go down, or we're seeing engagement go down, or we're seeing sales go up, usually the why behind what's happening is what the customers are telling us, right? We can watch the data all day long, but we don't have the reason behind it. And so I think marrying the ability for us to say, well, we saw retention go down, and we have these 5 things that customers are giving us feedback on, that are really critical to their business, and we're falling short. We think those are the drivers of why people are defecting. So It's the what and the why is the X and the O, in my
Yeah,
opinion.
the one thing I keep hearing is that we don't have that data, but that can't be true. I mean, surely somebody has that data within the organization to marry those two sides together. So where would you go to find that both X and O data? How do you get all that data to analyze and act on?
That's a good question. So one of the things that one of the activities that I do with organizations when I either in an organization or in consulting with an organization is I'll start with a customer intelligence inventory. And I literally lay out the journey that they have, not just the high level phases of the journey. And then with the cross-functional team, I'll go through and identify where do we have information about the customer? Where is it stored? How is it used? What, all just the information. And that can be anything. It can be feedback. It can be data itself, like the web analytics I was talking about. So across the organization now, we have a good understanding of what we know, and more importantly, what we don't know. And then I separate those into information and then feedback, right? So there's a good understanding now of what we have. And it's amazing that you'll see, I call it the comet effect. You'll see a whole bunch of information up front around marketing and campaigns, but as soon as the customer comes on board, it's just like nothing. It's like goes. So it starts with a whole bunch, and then it kind of goes down to not as much data. The other thing that I do around that is I also then map all the measures and metrics that are in place. So across the board. So what are we measuring around the customer, not for us, but around the customer? What's telling us, number of people who clicked on this new campaign, or the number of people who renewed their contract versus didn't. Whatever those measures are, putting those across the same place. And then the financial impact. So I talk about this a lot within your journey mapping. You need to add what's the financial impact of the experience to the organization? If this happens, if this particular event is happening, what are the ways that the needle can go up or down, meaning positive or negative impact? And so by doing that, you have the ability now to really see the data that you have and begin to stitch it together. Because if I go to each individual department, they're not going to have a viewpoint for this is my information and this is what I need to run my work. And we're just duplicating effort, and we're not getting a good holistic view of the customer. So you also have to orchestrate not just the journey, but you have to orchestrate the data journey behind what's happening. And that includes the X and O, as well as the measures and metrics. How else are you going to know? There's just no other way to make sure you are really taking a deep dive into what's going on. So I recommend that highly, because when you do that, just like journey mapping with a cross-functional team, very eye-opening.
And I think you had a really good idea there also about how you can then use, when you do even small pilots or projects, where you can then gather all this knowledge about this ROI that you get from pilot to pilot, and make the whole story from there. Can you maybe elaborate on that?
Right. Exactly right. Well, I think it's always when I talk to people about, we have X number of projects going that are going to improve the experience. And when I ask them what the measures are of success, they haven't defined them. So that what that means is they have not identified, hey, we're trying to change the number of, let's just say the number of people who, it's the number of people who stay longer than 90 days on a new app, right? That's always a big thing with technology, or 90 days, 60, 90 days, about the time when they go. So what's the percentage of people that are staying on the app? And what are the reasons why they're leaving or staying? And so to say, okay, if that's what I need to understand, then I need to make sure, one, I have those measures in place. And two, that I take a baseline when I kick off the project to say, hey, we're going to make this change. And what I find is they don't really have the baseline. They're not really tracking it. They assume they're going to get there. And so I think this structure around understanding what they're doing, why they're doing it, having a baseline and beginning to really show that change is important. The other thing that I tell them to do is look more holistically. So think about the change as this kind of core of what you're doing. But if you think about the other additive business value that you create, for example, let's say you're able to take some of those care issues and solve some content on the website or redirect people. It's not just the changing what the customer is achieving, right? That they'll be satisfied, they'll get their work done, there's success on measures on their side, but also now you're making the call center more productive and you're reducing cost, right? People don't take credit for those things. They take credit for like the change on the customer side, and they need to take credit for the other changes that they're making. So I always ask people to take your project and really look in that sphere of influence. What are the other things that you can, that will be impacted by this change? Cost and revenue, mostly.
Yeah. Sometimes it's also your best guesstimate of what it might be affecting, probably.
Yeah, you know what, you'll be surprised. I talked about in the webinar the benefits realization. If you go back and really look at all the impacts, you usually find things that were unanticipated, that you didn't realize there was a result of what you did, that there were also all these other benefits. And I think that people don't go back and do that retrospection to really think about what they did.
That's so true. Based on your experience, what level of ROI in percentage is on average to be expected from CX investments? And maybe if you can put this into some kind of time frame, that when can we expect a change or an impact to be visible?
I have, I was going to say I have no idea, because every company is different, and depending on what they do will impact that time frame. So what I always encourage folks to do is, the reason that you think about metrics like customer satisfaction, overall customer satisfaction, or net promoter score, so that takes a long time to move that needle in some instances, because it's an accumulation, it's a perception of how well you're doing. If you're doing it on a transaction, that's a little bit different story, but still it's not really a measure of ROI, right? Unless you're correlating it, and then you still need a lot of data. What I try to get people to focus on is, for every project that you're doing, every change that you're making, make sure you have it divided into small things that you know are going to be measured right away, where you could actually see in a week or a month, you can see some changes to the measures, so that you can start telling that story, and then bring alongside the metrics to show how they're also working. So it's kind of a dovetail, get very operational about the measures and then bring the metrics along. And it really depends on the project you're doing. Like if you're reducing defection with a pretty quick win, it could be right away. It could be one customer, like the customer that one organization I worked with, customers were worth 30 million or more. And so one customer being retained, or one division of that customer being retained was a lot of money. But it was, what did we do to make sure that hit? So it's like trying to pinpoint, exactly what ROI is, and where you are. But I do think it depends on the project and if you're talking about measures or metrics, and how they get impacted.
True. Yeah. It would be great to get some practical examples on how different companies follow the CX and ROI linkage. Can you share maybe some of your experiences on that?
Let's see, practical examples. I think there's a great example from AAA that I share a lot. And one of the things that they did was really look at all of their channels and try to optimize the channels and the interaction between them. And part of that was the ability for them to begin to assign particular benefits or opportunities around each of those channels, so that they were able to have a target for where they were headed. And that's sometimes the things that I don't really see. People have targets, but they don't actually understand what is going to contribute to that target. Usually it's one or two things that they say, if we do X and Y, it's going to move that target, when in fact it's a lot more things. So one of the things that they did was really take a deep dive in each of the channels and say, what are all the things we could do? Understand those and the impact they would have on the outcome for both the business and the customer, and then prioritize them by channel so that they, one, saw more opportunity and some quick wins, but two, had more ways to influence that number.
What would you say are two things, or if it's too difficult, then just go with one single one, that practitioners can do today to build this competency, to be able to show CX and the ROI on experiences?
Absolutely. Go talk to your CFO. Make sure that you are educated about how your organization thinks about ROI, what you know and don't know. So the CFO is critical to that earlier conversation we had about measures and metrics and what we know and the business value behind them. Because if you don't have, for example, a cost to serve, if you don't understand cost to serve, it's going to be really hard to impact that number if it doesn't exist today. So it's making sure you have that, and your CFO, by the way, will have that information, but also that's who the CEO listens to. So it's important to get them on board to understand how customer experience works and the financial impact. So once you have he or she on board, I think you'll see a big change in the support of CX and ROI. The second piece I would suggest is this inventory that I talked about. What do you know? What don't you know? What are you measuring today, and what metrics do you have? And then how are you attaching business value to it? What does that mean today? What do you know? What you don't know? As I think if you start just down one path and you don't have this holistic picture, and that's our role, right? Is to create these holistic pictures. Why wouldn't you do it for measures and metrics and ROI? So do that inventory and make sure you have a good understanding of what the organization knows and doesn't know.
Sounds like very sound advice there. So thank you, Diane, very much for joining us for this short chat today. How can people get in touch with you if they have more questions to ask you?
Oh, I'm happy to talk to anyone. You can reach me on LinkedIn or at Diane@expcatalyst.com.
Thank you.
Ping me.
And Diane has also written 2 blogs, or one blog in 2 parts for CXPA.fi website, so you can go and have a read there to learn more. Also, if you haven't watched our webinar yet, please go and see the recording on our website. Thank you.